You're listening to the All Things Data Podcast, the show that brings you insights and informed conversation around today's ever-advancing knowledge economy. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, All Things Data brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science, data-driven strategies, and enable digital transformation. Your hosts are Dan Yarmaluk, Dr. Manjeet Reghe, and Thomas Marlowe.
Welcome to the All Things Data Podcast. I'm Dan Yarmaluk with my co-pilot, Tom Marlowe. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Dan.
And we have a great guest today, someone who's right in the middle of execution and getting things done with customers and getting great technologies laid out for the SMB market. It is CEO Doug of Brightworks. So Doug Miller, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background and, your years in technology? I know from your bio, when I read it, it has decades of technology work, but can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I am I'm very fortunate in that I'm of an age that I grew up right at the start of the introduction of PCs and home computing, and am just a little bit younger than Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. So when they were starting to build their companies, I was in school. I was growing up. And my very first computer was a Heathkit that my dad and I built.
Nice.
With an 8080 processor programmed in assembly language. I was 9 years old learning to program in assembler. And went from there to a Commodore PET 2001 with a whopping 4K of RAM. Serial number 95.
Oh, that's cool.
Still have that, by the way.
That's a keeper.
Been through CPM machines and the early days of Apple and just all that stuff. So, even though I'm older than the people who are typically considered digital natives, largely due to my father, who was a technician in the Air Force, I kind of was a digital native, one of the real leading edges of it. And despite that, really strove to avoid getting into technology. My dad was like, you need to go into computers. And of course, when you're 18, right, the last thing you're going to do is what your dad tells you to do. So I actually got a degree in natural resources. Nothing to do with technology. And yet, during that whole time, right, I was constantly doing stuff with technology. I can remember I had a class where we had a project where we had to design a metro park.
Now, you must have had an interest. Because for a 9-year-old to be programming in assembler, that's not just a thing that you do on an afternoon. So there's got to be an innate interest in there.
Very much so, but by God, I was going to deny it, right? And yet it just kept cropping out in things like this project where my big part of it was, and this would have been back about 1985, 86. I included in the design a computerized kiosk in the park where people could print out their own self-guided brochures. And, it just kept coming up.
It's there.
Right. Until finally years later, after a graduate degree and some other jobs, I ended up as doing some consulting with a company on their IT function, and then hired by another company as their first IT director. And then followed a whole set thereafter of corporate IT positions in a variety of industries, doing all kinds of different stuff, everything from GIS to industrial robotics. At one point, I was the senior VP of operations for an industrial robotics company that made the largest robots in the world at that point.
Oh, no kidding. Now that's more than just IT work at that point.
Yeah, it was. And if we had more time, I'd tell you about the time that I actually stopped tank production for all of South Korea for a year because they wouldn't pay a bill. But it was interesting as I went through that process.
I do want to hear that story sometime, by the way.
It's a pretty interesting story. But as I learned more and more about enterprise technology by being in these companies, I was also learning a lot about business. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the robotics companies went out of business. I got to see what a Chapter 11 looked like from the inside. I was part of a financial services company that actually created a new security.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I got to go through the process of trying to get a no action letter with the SEC, which was a trip. So I kind of came out the other side of this with a lot of enterprise tech knowledge, mm-hmm. but also a lot of business knowledge from, really being down at the street level.
That's interesting because in a lot of folks that I work with that I see having careers that expand, beyond what that entry level position, track was. It tends to be the folks that, for whether it's inadvertent or on purpose, get themselves exposed to the areas of the business that interact with, right. what it is their central job. And, you come out of it a heck of a lot more valuable for doing that job that you're in, or, for the things that are, kind of melds of those, where in so much of the work that I see, whether it's in the legal field or in the technical field, having an understanding of where that puzzle piece can fit within a business is so valuable. Like, so much good comes out of it.
It does. And frankly, it's what in the end drove me to start Brightworks Group. I'd done a stint running the IT engineering group for the data centers at a large public hospital. So I got healthcare experience in a level 1 trauma center, and then went off into a series of jobs with basically IT service providers.
Sure.
And finally got to the point where I said, look, the problem I just am continually seeing is these service providers or internal IT functions, mm-hmm. they're wrapped up in the technology. They don't get where that puzzle piece fits.
Mm. Trying to operate in a vacuum.
They're trying to operate in a vacuum. And the number of times I heard IT people say, IT is IT. I don't need to understand what the business is, right? It all just,
yep.
And it's not true, right? I mean, if you don't understand, there was a time back when we were all white-robed priests in a glass room that, we could all kind of pretend. But those days are over,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially if you're either trying to keep budgets constrained, or, as what tends to be the case these days, trying to get more and more efficient with workflows. any kind of integration of automation into a process, you can't do that with IT in a vacuum.
You can't. And I think too often that what happens is people that are in technology forget what the inherent purpose of technology is. My hobby, which is sort of referenced by the longsword that's on the wall back there.
I was going to ask. I was waiting for the right moment.
I'm very into history.
Sure. And for our listeners that can't see the video here, Doug has what looks like a beautiful sword hanging from the wall behind him. And I mean, I wouldn't want to break into your house.
Yeah, there's actually some other stuff sitting around too that you can't see. There's actually even a small piece from ancient Egypt that's about 3,500 years old that's sitting on a bookshelf here.
Oh, no kidding.
Along with some bronze Roman brooches, clothing fasteners from about the 1st century AD.
So you're a history buff.
Yeah, very much so.
Very cool.
And spend a lot of time reading about history, things that other people simply aren't interested in. But at the end of the day, that the thing about history is that history is often the history also of technology. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. All technology over time exists in order to allow people to do something that they weren't able to do in the past.
Yeah, or that makes sense.
Do it more easily, more effectively. Nobody ever invented anything for the sake of just inventing something, right? It had a purpose. And I mean, your background with intellectual property speaks directly to this, right?
Yeah, although I will say I have seen a few patents that have made me scratch my head.
Right. There's probably a fair degree of insanity out there.
Yeah, it's true. But your point is well taken. The majority of innovation is driven by something.
Some sort
otherwise,
of right.
Otherwise, why innovate?
Exactly, and to just fetishize and worship the technology for the sake of the technology as opposed to what its impact is misses the boat. And I think a lot of technologists fail to grasp the implications either on a micro scale or, frankly, it's one of the big discussions we're having nationwide right now, on a macro scale.
Yeah. Well, and you see that play out in companies that are too tech forward as they start up.
Yeah.
And have a cool piece of technology. It's new, it's different, but haven't fully worked through the application,
right?
The use case, the user experience, whether it's something that is I guess, better enough, for lack of a better way to put it, to get somebody to switch from what they're doing today to the new thing. And the companies that don't take that into consideration, I mean, you see, what looks like amazing pieces of technology just crash and burn.
Right. Pretty frequently. And a lot of that was my experience with the robot company that went out of business. This robot company actually invented the first low-cost laser vision sensor in the industry.
Oh, cool.
And they developed from scratch, literally wrote the operating system, the whole 9 yards, one of the first PC-based robot controllers. Even today, a lot of robotics are not PC controlled. They're controlled by programmable logic controllers.
Sure.
And at the time, that was definitely the case. And so they invented this great, cool stuff, but didn't really have a use case for it.
Right. On that note, Doug, can you tell me where you feel most of the nation, because you're servicing a wide variety of customers, SMB, probably some large, across a variety of industries. Where do you think the state of the union is now in terms of what they need, and where what are the right building blocks for people to succeed, and where Brightworks has ended up,
Right. It's an interesting time in that, boy, there's some really amazing stuff going on out there, right? We hear all the time about quote unquote AI, which we have that discussion as to how the A is, but call it machine learning.
Yep.
Things like self-driving cars and just all this, really cool gee whiz stuff. And yet, when I walk into most businesses, particularly small, medium-sized enterprises, their network doesn't stay up.
Yeah.
They can't make phone calls reliably. It's the basics, right? I talk about how dealing with IT today and technology today is sort of a Maslow's hierarchy kind of thing. You walk in and you think, right, you're going to talk about Stoic philosophy, but the person that you're talking to is living in a wet cardboard box under an overpass.
They need shelter first.
Right? They're not going to talk about Stoic philosophy. So, we can go to companies and we can talk about digital transformation, which, right, that's another one of those wonderful, what the hell are we actually talking about kind of words.
That's a popular one.
It's a very popular one.
Yep. We touch on that a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those, and we use it, right? Because it's the marketing buzz phrase. But what's that really mean? And when you go in with the thought you're going to talk about how they might leverage machine learning to transform their IT, to facilitate digital transformation, and they look at you and they go, "That's cool, love to talk about that, but my printer doesn't work." Right? And it's very, very easy. And many companies, their whole approach to everything is based around, well, let's keep fixing the broken printer. The printer's got to get fixed. I'll grant you that. But the problem is the way that we have tended to approach it in the industry is not to fix it so it becomes a non-issue, but to build a whole business around repeatedly fixing the same things.
Sure.
So, Doug, this is when I really did a deep dive into why certain things aren't getting rolled out fast enough. What's the matter with the channel? What's the matter with the marketing? Is it because OEM solutions are pitching something? And it's not agnostic, right? Because they're all fighting for their part of the widgets in that technology stack. But I do, after a lot of thought with a lot of folks on this, I'm resonating with what you're saying, and it's really the truth. It's like they're firefighting instead of long-term planning, right?
Absolutely.
So we can't even talk about 5G at the edge, machine learning, visualization of a big plant or industrial line when, first of all, he doesn't even have the people, the resources, because they've leaned it out, right? It's so lean.
Right.
And then, he's firefighting. So he is first just getting the network there and the data flowing.
Right.
But so I have started to come to believe that we have to make it easy for them to buy, right? It has to be a complete system. Kind of, how do I finance it? How do they pay for it? How do I deliver it? This whole thing of the buying experience, or the ability to try it in a shared risk fashion, right, where it's not so expensive, is really the rub. This is the rub. They're firefighting and not. We can talk big technology words all we want, but this is the truth with the lion's share of the market. I think you're right. So,
we're right there with you, and we have been shaping our offerings to do exactly what you're talking about, right? When one of the most common calls I get from small businesses is, our current provider just told me that I need to spend $30 or $40 or $50,000 on infrastructure immediately.
Yeah.
Because that's what's causing all my problems. And number one, I don't understand why I didn't know about that beforehand. Why am I just finding out about it today instead of in time to budget for it? Number two, I'm not really sure I want to spend $50,000 on a bunch of stuff that's going to sit in a room and depreciate.
Right.
And third, I'm not really sure I trust that they're right.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think has identified kind of three issues, right? There's a lack of a shared responsibility for the expense. It's all being hung on people, on businesses. Look, you just got to invest, right? But how many times in IT do we talk about that? Well, IT is strategic. You need to invest. Well, wait a minute. All this gear that you want me to invest in 5 years is going to be scrap.
Right.
Is that really invest? Second, there's no long-term thinking or strategy involved. It's, oh, hey, buy it tomorrow.
Right.
Wait a minute. That's not how businesses work. We got to get our head around the idea that the business isn't just sitting here on a bunch of, the CEO of this company isn't driving around a car with a trunk full of gold bars, just waiting to buy a bunch of equipment.
Right. That basically maintains the status quo.
That maintains the status quo. Right. Exactly. And then finally, because of all this stuff, there's a real lack of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and if you think about it, that's like the path of least resistance.
Right.
And the easiest is what are they doing today? Let's do the exact same thing, but with new equipment.
With new stuff.
If
right.
you're the service provider recommending that, it's lazy, but it'll probably work.
It's safe.
Yeah, it's safe.
There's very little need for educating the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You don't have to try and get them to understand why they should do something different.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of SG&A there, and traditionally MSPs just say you need a new server, or I would imagine as a business owner, whatever we call that, the divisional chief or head, or he doesn't even consider this stuff. It's just like, we got to do it. If I don't have a server, I can't get an email, kind of a thing.
And that's when, if you're talking about it from a technological perspective, right, then that's where you're nailed, because he doesn't think about it. He or she doesn't think about this stuff. But if you start talking about business problems and how you're going to help them solve business problems, and what falls out of that is technology that you can directly connect to how to solve their business problem, well, that divisional chief or CEO or COO or whatever it is, business owner, they are thinking about their business problems. So you got to have that discussion. But again, particularly on the IT infrastructure side of things, this is an industry that is focused for the last 30 years on selling boxes.
Yeah. So if we go back to the scenario of $30,000 to $50,000 of infrastructure costs, why didn't I know that? I don't know if I want that level of CapEx, and is it even true? So Doug, you imagined your world being in industrial robotics, AI, machine learning of semiconductors, and you're finding yourself in the vast frontline field general of where technology and transformation is happening today. So how did you overcome, why didn't I know that, CapEx, and is it true? Is this the manifestation of CompleteCloud with Brightworks?
CompleteCloud is sort of the current answer to this, right? And it came about through a process that's taken us about 9 years. We always started 9 years ago with the idea that, hey, the way we're doing it isn't right. We've got to come up with something that alleviates this business pain. And so over time, what that meant was developing systems and processes, not technologies, right? It meant really understanding what was it that was difficult. That thing that you said earlier about they're not thinking about it, right? They're not considering it. And what do they really want out of it? And you know, Tom, you sort of alluded to, you know, the business owner just wanting things to be status quo, right?
Yeah, they need a particular functionality.
Right. And the analogy that I kept always coming back to was electricity. You know, kind of a utility that when I walk into a room in the morning and flip on a light switch, I don't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens.
And you don't need to know how that electricity was made or delivered.
Right.
As long as it reliably gets to the switch.
Right. There's this massive infrastructure behind this with a lot of complexity, but I don't need to know anything about it. And every 3 to 5 years, I don't have to sit down and have a discussion about building electricity generating plant.
Right. We need to get a new generator or a fuel cell installed in your backyard.
Right. Exactly.
Which, yes, that'll deliver you the electricity, but doesn't seem to be the most efficient.
Not solving my problem, right?
Well, and think about the ops side of it, right? If you've got this equipment on premise, you need people to maintain the operations of it.
That's exactly, you've taken the metaphor to the next level, right? I don't have, now there are companies who do, but for the most part, it is certainly small and mid-sized businesses, they don't have an electrical engineer on staff to operate a generating facility.
Right.
It wouldn't even, the whole idea of that would be ludicrous.
Right, exactly.
Right? Nobody would ever think about that. And you know, there was a big fight back in the 1920s between the advocates of Tesla and the advocates of Edison about DC versus AC. And guess what? We picked the infrastructure that didn't require you to have a plant on site. We did the opposite with IT.
Right.
Right? We did exactly the opposite.
Well, and if you think about a lot of that probably stemmed from many years ago, not every business needed a baseline of kind of IT capability.
Right.
Right. You could get away with, you know, your books and a cash register, but today, you know, pretty much every business has a baseline of IT capability that's needed internally.
It's become a utility.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that. I like that, you know, using that term utility for it because it's true.
It has to be delivered that way. So that means a lot of things that we have to do as the provider of the utility to deliver here's another phrase from the past that I grew up with that I've always loved, carrier grade experience.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, also, like, we have to really double click into what Doug's value is what we're doing here. And we realize we're moving to a cloud-based world. We get it. And we get that people can get AWS or Azure certified, but there's this big question and unknown, even when you have someone who is smart to build kind of an architecture, that there's people are bitching that their cloud costs are coming out $10,000 more than they anticipated. Nobody can anticipate these costs for real. All these cost calculators. So what Doug really, this is probably another level that few people can grasp, because you have to look at our various levels, is you're managing all that risk and uncertainty.
Exactly, right? What we're again trying to deliver is a very consistent, reliable, expected set of outcomes. Because that's what businesses need, right? I mean, the reason that everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off right now is the overall uncertainty of the environment, right? The election and COVID and blah, 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 blah. Uncertainty causes business problems. If your technology introduces a lot of uncertainty on top of it, if you don't know what it's going to cost, if you don't know how it's going to perform, if you don't know when you're going to need to cut CapEx, those are all major distractors from somebody's business.
Mm-hmm. So if we look at it at another level too, is yes, you can get AWS certified. Yes, you can run a open source chirp stack on a LoRa protocol thing and save $1 or $2. The issue becomes long term, how do you manage compute, storage and other things when you're moving into a near real-time environment or a data-intensive environment. And that 9 years of you gronking on that is through reality, learning how to manage cloud costs and infrastructure, et cetera, which is like, this is really it probably took about 9 years, and people are gasping now for answers going, what am I doing wrong?
That's it. Everybody, and I remember back, I'm a VCP3. That's how far back I go with virtualization and cloud technologies is, very, very early days in this stuff. And everybody, early on, particularly as we started going to cloud, there was no conception of what's this really going to cost, right? It was all just how cool is this, and focus on the technologies and focus on the fact that it's going to give us some real business capabilities we didn't have before, in terms of flexibility and things like that. But I ran across a concept pretty early in my virtualization career called Jevons paradox.
Okay.
You ever heard of Jevons paradox?
No.
I don't think so.
So Jevon was a guy in early Industrial Revolution England.
Okay.
Who was an economist, and he was studying the price of coal during the Industrial Revolution. And he realized that you never actually saw a decrease. You would have thought that as we invented machinery that was more efficient, that had more efficient steam engines in it, it used less coal. So because demand went down, the price of coal ought to go down.
Sure.
But what he actually saw was the price of coal holding steady or actually growing. And the reason for that was that, well, if I could use half the amount of coal with this one new machine, well, then I'm going to buy two machines.
Right.
Virtualization did exactly the same thing. If I only need, right, if suddenly I don't have the deployment costs and the spin up time and all the other stuff associated with putting a physical server in a physical data center, and I can trim that down to half or a third, well, now I want 3 servers, not 1. Because I have the budget for it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we turned that to 11 when we moved to the cloud.
Yeah, and people don't really understand the velocity of the big data coming at us. I mean, I can't, like, just in the last few weeks, my daughters have passed their 199 tier for iCloud or Google. So I got to go up to like a 2 terabyte tier. And this, I know this is pictures, videos, and streaming emailed advertisements that just nobody's deleting, because like there's nothing important. They just got their email addresses so many years ago. So it is Jevons paradox plus this just velocity of big data, right? I mean, it is really insane. And let's also admit that all the mobile phones and all these clouds, really all they care about is storage. It's the best annuity on the planet, or perpetuity that just keeps giving and giving and giving. So when you go to your phones, the preferences are swipe to archive instead of swipe to delete, even though we know that people want to delete. So it's just amassing and amassing and amassing. So
sure. I mean, that emails dodged from the beginning a decade ago, right? They sold us on that. You don't need to delete it. Keep it forever, right?
Yeah. Why delete it? Right.
Why delete it? We've got powerful search. Just keep it. And now we're buried under it.
Yeah, that's my paradox. Dan's paradox is we're buried under it. What the heck am I going to do? Remember that one here, folks.
Right. Am I going to move myself up to the next tier? And it's not too expensive. It's only a few extra bucks per month.
So this, with Jevons paradox and big data, and you're trying to provide predictability of complete cloud, can you lower their costs, or is it commensurate with what their expectations are?
We have found that yes, we've been able to lower costs considerably, right?
Yeah.
Some of it's going back to CompleteCloud is a 100% private cloud solution. Now, I mean, we're all big guys here. We've been around a long time, and we know what private cloud means. It's somebody else's computer in a data center, right? That's what we're doing. There's no magic here. We're just giving people their own computers in a data center and maintaining it for them.
Okay.
There's no wizardry, but by the fact that we can virtualize everything they're doing, and this is a VDI as well as a virtualization play, right? We virtualize all the workstations as well. And we put all this stuff in a private cloud environment with a very standardized architecture. And we wrap it with modern security. And then we just start asking questions like, okay, you've got 100 employees, but 37 of those are field staff. What do they actually need?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where your strategic mind comes into play, Doug. Yeah.
Do they actually just need email? Because that's a whole different story, right? I can give them email accounts that they can access off their phones.
Right.
They don't really need all this other stuff, right?
Email and a mobile device, and they're good to go.
Right? They're good to go. And we don't think, and even at executive levels, I took a business trip to Chicago last week. I was gone the whole day, had meetings. You know what I took with me?
Yeah, seriously, man.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. Your phone. And what is that tablet, by the way?
That is a Remarkable 2.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about this one.
Writing
notes in your phone.
Yeah, it's an e-ink tablet that syncs. It has a cloud service, right? But it has a remarkable, no pun intended, paper-like writing experience.
Yeah, I was going to get it.
Oh man, I am so happy with it.
I'm a note taker. Yeah. I mean, I just
and I'm the same way. If I write it down, I'll remember it. And I can write much faster than I can type, and I, it'll recognize it. I can send it off. I can turn it into text, but for the most part, I don't. I can use it to annotate stuff. So if I've got 2 or 3 documents that I want to take a look at, PDFs, I can throw them on there.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So, what I've done is I've actually got a really trimmed down kit. If I'm going to go out, I don't have to have, and my main computer, for crying out loud, is a Surface Book, right? And I'm going, oh, look, that's too big.
All right.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what you're saying is this type of analysis, like you're doing when you're, going on a work trip, but why not do this type of analysis for the company?
Do it for the company and do it continually. That's the other thing that we found was really important, right? There's all kinds of processes out there. You can buy canned IT assessment tools and all this other stuff, and people go out and they do a one-time run of it, and they give you a report and they go, oh, look at all the really bad stuff. and then they fix it. They charge you a bunch of money to fix it, and then they go away. And 6 months later, there you are again, right?
Right.
So we really found that our analysis process had to be a continual loop. We really needed to be looking at what was going on a regular basis and having conversations with the business about what they were doing from a business perspective on a regular basis. Not, how's your email working conversations.
Yeah. How can we do more with less, right?
Yeah.
Well, I find the wisest people in technology are trying to figure out what is the data that we really need, information, processes, workflows, as opposed to everything. So if you could say, you have a lot of sales calls. This has been a very organic creation of Brightworks based upon like what would you want to say to SMB business owners, that a podcast could help with? What would you want them to think about? What would you want to communicate?
Yeah, I want them to think about, there's always the plea to these people of, recognize technology as a strategic resource. And that's true, but I think it's often delivered in completely the wrong context, right? It's delivered as think about this from the perspective of what technology you want to buy. I want them to think about, if you had no limits, what could you do with your business?
Well, it's almost like don't even think about the technology.
Right.
The technology is just a solution.
That's it.
To what you want to do. It shouldn't be thinking about the technology and then figuring out how you want to use it. It's what do you need your business to do?
What do you need your business to do, right?
Yeah.
And don't come in and bring me in because you want to have a discussion about big data or machine learning, or one of the big things that we're seeing a lot right now is not just security specifically, but things like CMMC, compliance related kinds of things, right? They're going to have to comply because they want to be a DoD subcontractor, and they've got to deal with that. Well, there's stuff beyond that, right? There's a strategy there. Yes, I get that you need to be CMMC certified. Why do you need to be CMMC certified? Well, because we want to be a government subcontractor. Well, why do you want to be? What's driving that? Tell me the real outcome you're after here.
Right.
And then I can help you figure out what the solution is. It might be something like CompleteCloud, but on the other hand, it might be that there's a whole chunk of your business, maybe that portion of the business that you need to be CMMC certified that you need to pass an audit for, it's actually a really small part of your business that you just started doing a few years ago because you had to do it to do something else. And the smart thing for you to do would actually be to outsource that to somebody who already is that.
Right.
Or if it's growing, to bake in a process with technology that makes sense, right? Either way you evaluate it. So can you point to, like, Doug, like what you felt has been the best success cases? Like you said, we should sit down and talk. So can you paint a picture of your customers? Like you said, started with nothing, with email problems. We went to the cloud and they streamlined. Now we talk once a month or once a quarter strategically, and they have XXX better. Can you tell us like what the route to victory is?
For example, we've got a civil engineering firm. They're about, I'm going to guess they're somewhere around 30 million a year, around 100 employees. They do civil engineering. They do have a very healthy LiDAR practice where they do LiDAR scans, right? Which has its own set of really interesting technology issues, because every time you do a LiDAR scan, the point cloud that gets produced is at least a terabyte of data, right? So how are you storing that? Well, we started with these guys probably 7 years ago.
Yep.
And we were originally brought in because the COO of the company felt like the internal IT team were just really not up to providing what they needed, right? They were a couple of good desktop guys, but didn't have a strategic bone in their body. And so brought us in to help them out. And, right off the bat, the first thing that we found was, oh my gosh, you guys don't even have a backup really running consistently. You've got, at that time, 17 terabytes of survey data and no backup. So again, it was that living in a wet cardboard box underneath an overpass, but not even realizing that there was anything you could do beyond living in the wet cardboard box, right? And over the course of years, our relationship kind of proceeded along a typical IT kind of managed services relationship, where we became effectively their IT department, but a lot of it was the day-to-day, just a lot of tickets and a lot of the crap. And we finally came to him and said, look, we can tell just from our interactions with you and your staff that you're, after 6 years, while you're not dissatisfied, you're not looking at us as delivering real value. And we're looking at you and going, God, if we see another ticket, we're going to shoot ourselves in the head. Right? Because it's very, the way that things currently are is very draining. We have a whole new idea, and they were our first CompleteCloud customer.
Okay.
And we moved them to CompleteCloud after about a year that they took to think about it, right? We had to keep coming back to them and having sort of the high-level discussions that then kept slipping back down because, these guys are running CAD. They're running Revit. They're running Civil 3D. They've got teams in the field, all that stuff.
Sure.
And there was very, pedal to the metal, concrete demonstrations of, look, your CAD engineers are going to be able to function more effectively this way than what they're currently doing. And then we had to develop we developed a calculator where they could plug costs in what they were spending today, not just on our service, but hardware and software and network connectivity and everything, to come out with this is what IT's really costing you per month. This is what CompleteCloud's going to cost you per month. On the cost saving side, by the time you amortized the cost of all their servers and all of their CAD workstations, we were going to save them $5,000 a month by moving to CompleteCloud. No
kidding.
So that became pretty intriguing to them, right?
Yeah.
So they made the move after about a year, and they made the move in, I say they were our first CompleteCloud customer. They were the first customer we talked to about CompleteCloud. They were not the first ones to migrate because they took a year to think about it. So they made the move at the end of last year, the beginning of this year.
So for the people that don't know, all those CAD workstations were transferred to software in the cloud, right? And then for the SMBs that would be listening, you didn't have to have a human at that actual workstation. They could do it anywhere. So this is decentralized. Now we're in a COVID world where this stuff is really relevant.
And that's exactly what happened, right? Is in March, they picked up and went home and were able to keep working literally without missing a beat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Right? I mean, you took 100 engineers and sent them all home, and in less than one workday, they were immediately productive. There was no, I'm going to have to take this expensive $5,000 or $10,000 workstation and cart it home and figure out some place to put it.
Right.
And then what am I going to do about the fact that all of our storage is sitting on servers back in a server room at our offices, and I need to open those files, but my colleague who's also working on the project needs to open those files.
Yeah.
All of that went away.
Yeah, all of it went away. And,
all of it went away.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then the flexibility. And people have to understand that any kind of cybersecurity, your security posture, productivity changes, patches, updates, ransomware, more people being provisioned to use these things, like that all just is like full-time maintenance and work of people that are really
a lot of work,
smart, and it's transitioning. When I talk to people that are in technology, we're just going to be on this continuous world of bridge. And if anybody's questioning it, the one thing in the middle that is in the bridge of all this is a decentralized cloud architecture that's got security and scalability and robustness that you don't want to worry about. And that is the proposition that Doug has created. I mean, do you feel like you're one of a small group that's doing fully outsourced cloud solution provider? And I realize people should understand Doug has a particular niche in compliance, like healthcare, Department of Defense, and other agencies that are regulated. So that has a big component and caveat to it. But do you feel like this is where the world's going, or do you feel you're on an island of one? Or
no, there are a few others out there that are doing this. We have partnered with a company called Avatara out of St. Louis, who helps us with a lot of the back end, and they have other partners, right? So there are those folks, and then there are a couple of other companies out there who are have kind of similar offerings, right?
Right.
I think one of the big things that's different about the offering that we're presenting is we solved a big problem around CAD in the cloud. From a technical perspective, CAD is very difficult to deliver in a virtual desktop environment.
Yep. You need the responsiveness for the person doing the work.
And software like Revit and AutoCAD don't like emulated video cards. They want real hardware. So that's what we give them, right? In the case of engineering workstations, we are actually running a stack of one-use servers with AutoCAD certified graphics cards and using the Teradici PC over IP graphics protocol for remote connectivity. So every engineer actually has a physical workstation.
Very cool. I was talking with a friend of mine a few months ago over the summer. He does video work. Mm-hmm. Similar type of hardware needs, right? And he was talking about how he needed to upgrade his machine at in his office in order to handle some new technologies. And this isn't a space that I play in, but from what it sounds like, I had suggested, what about having a machine that wasn't in your house right. or in your office, where you wouldn't have to worry about, like we've been saying, the upgrade in 3 years, 5 years, where you buy that, you rent it effectively.
Right.
Because it's a lot easier for that to be built and stood up in a data center somewhere where it's temperature controlled, and you can just kind of identify the hardware spec that you need,
right,
and then get access to it.
Again, it's going back to what's the real business problem you're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Your friend doesn't want to own a computer.
Right.
Your friend has that's not the business problem. Your friend is trying to do video editing
mm-hmm.
and produce a certain outcome. That's the thing we have to become focused on. How do we help that person get to their outcome without diverting them down a path? I frequently talk to prospects of ours about, look, I'm in the business of getting you out of the infrastructure owning business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be that.
Right.
Do you have any watch-outs, Doug, for people that think they could do that internally with AWS? I'm getting AWS certified. There's a big difference between having a working vocabulary, right? And
there is. And, there's a couple of things, right? Number one, just strictly from an overall performance perspective, public cloud is a shared resource at the end of the day. And you have security, potential security gotchas. Not that AWS and Azure are not secure. They are a pretty secure environment, but
mm-hmm.
not secure enough if you're subject to certain compliance constraints. So that's the first thing you need to be aware of. Second of all, and we've seen this, we have customers who use various SaaS applications that are hosted in Azure or AWS. And depending on how the SaaS company has allocated their instances, we've seen situations where one of their customers is running a big job and it's impacting the performance for this other customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've
like how so? Like so much compute, just the latency was off?
Yeah, just the latency goes up, and we'll again, the way it manifests is we'll suddenly get a bunch of people hitting our help desk going, hey, application X, Y, and Z is just not working very well for me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one thing if it's one person. When it becomes 20 people, if it's one person, I'm going to go look at their PC. If it's 20 people, I'm calling the provider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Doug, would you just distinguish, private cloud and the public cloud, just for people that don't know, so they understand what that means?
Yeah. So public cloud are going to be things like AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and or some of the more regional data center players who have stood up environments using things like VMware Horizon or other tools like that, where what's happening is there's a big plant of hardware, servers and storage, that through software is being subdivided between multiple customers.
Yep.
Right. So if you're on a public cloud and your application is running on a public cloud, your server is running on a public cloud, you're a virtualized server that's on a piece of physical hardware that a number of other customers may be on, right? There's a number of other people running servers.
Yeah.
Right.
A private cloud is, back in my younger days, we just used to call it co-location or hosting. Now the formal name is now private cloud, but all of our CompleteCloud customers, they have a complete IT environment. All their servers, network, workstations, etc., are running on dedicated hardware.
Yep.
It's in a data center, but nobody else is using it. Only they are.
Sure.
So your CompleteCloud is a cordoned off area in the data center for your customers.
Correct.
So that we know the pipe is so big and no one but our customers, and you're right sizing the pipe as needed by your client base. Yeah, but it's still running. It's a dedicated area in the public cloud for you and in that horsepower, storage, etc.
Yeah, and unlike true public cloud, right, where I've got a physical server that might have multiple customers utilizing it. Every customer is getting their own server here, right? So they're getting their own virtualization. Now, these racks are in, as you correctly mentioned, a data center that's got many, many customers in it, but CompleteCloud customers get their own stuff. I can walk in, and this is really important from a compliance perspective. If I get an auditor, I can walk that auditor in and physically point to the machines that belong to the customer.
Sure.
They are auditing, right? The difference here, too, is that unlike what we used to call co-location, we're assuming a big part of the financial risk because they're not having to buy that stuff up front.
Yep.
They don't have to go buy servers.
Right.
We're providing that, and they're paying for the use of those month after month after month.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do you have a particular public cloud that you like to use, or do you use a hybrid across all of them?
We kind of use a hybrid. I'd say anymore we're leaning more and more towards Azure. And I wouldn't necessarily say because of technical features so much as just, Microsoft keeps doing what Microsoft is good at. And if you're already using Office 365, for example, you've already got a foot in Azure. So if you don't want to make a move to a true private cloud infrastructure like CompleteCloud, and you're going to use public cloud, and you're already using Office 365, or I guess we now call it Microsoft 365, and I want to eliminate on-prem servers, well, the natural thing to do is use Azure Active Directory. And once I put in Azure Active Directory, well, then I might as well use this. And,
exactly.
It's the Microsoft addiction thing.
I've heard a lot of great things about Azure. I've heard a lot of, even just cultural things that Azure is listening to the customers and AWS is telling them about themselves, right? So it's.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that Microsoft turned a really interesting corner a few years ago when it had a leadership change.
Yeah, he's been great. He's got a lot of empathy, and he's thinking about his customers, which is really what we're talking about at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah. Well, do you feel you have so much work in this space, or do you see you're going to pivot into other niches and areas? Where is it going?
No, this is really our thing. Now, we're continually adding pieces to it, right? I mean, we find that there are customers who maybe aren't quite ready to make that wholesale move to a complete environment like CompleteCloud.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they need something, right? So we've developed and partnered with other companies on a variety of sort of more limited offerings. We've got some very interesting SIM and SOC security offerings that are really SIM and SOC as a service. Again, you need security, but what's the business problem? The business problem is I don't want to get cryptoware, and I don't want to get a breach, and I don't want to get blah blah blah.
Right.
I don't want to run a SIM and a SOC.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So I can rent those to you.
Mm-hmm.
Different things like that to solve very specific problems. Then the most recent thing that we've really been starting to work on a lot are offerings that help existing IT functions sort of level up.
Right.
One of those is an offering that is a tool designed for major incident management. More and more today, whether it's a SaaS provider or a decent sized, mid-sized enterprise, because of as we were talking before, every company has a baseline of IT need.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an interruption to that, if you have an outage, that's a big deal, right?
Oh yeah.
Especially if it's customer facing.
Yeah.
And yet what we've done over time, and I remember this well from my days, particularly in healthcare IT. You have a major incident. What do you do, right? Well, you got to go out. You got to figure out how to fire up a conference bridge, because you can get a bunch of people on a call, and then maybe you fire up Teams or Slack and you create a specific channel for chatting about it. Meanwhile, a bunch of people are shooting emails back and forth. While you're trying to solve it, management pokes their head in and goes, "Hey, did you guys know the network's down?" And you got to answer their questions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's a complex situation that involves multiple stakeholders, often from multiple pieces of an organization, or even particularly today outside the organization.
Right.
Trying to manage that with like a ticketing system where 90% of the participants in the outage don't even have access to it.
Right.
That doesn't work. We found a partner, they're actually out of Israel, that has developed an AWS hosted major incident management orchestration system.
Interesting.
That actually ties into monitoring systems, chat systems, conference bridges, the whole 9 yards, so that you can certainly kick it off manually, but at the same time, if your monitoring system tells you you've got a major incident, you will have predefined who the incident team is. It just fires it up, starts the conference bridge, has the chat connection, and then the whole thing's managed as a timeline.
Oh, cool.
So you got
very cool.
Yeah, this really cool timeline interface. But that's a lot of what we do. Is we're all the time looking for, all right, we see these problems. We see these business problems. Who's got a solution that solves at least part of it?
Well, I'll tell you, as a customer too, for a solution like that, like it sounds like it would be very useful. But I also, at the same time, would be hesitant to go shopping for it, because I'm thinking, I don't want to have to rely on something like this.
Right.
I would almost rather have a kind of larger scope IT service provider providing me services. And then, oh, by the way, if an incident comes up, we've got that covered.
And that's You're dead
That
on.
feels more comfortable for me.
Right.
They slap Doug.
Right. Yeah, you know, I think you're exactly right. And it goes back to that utility metaphor, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how it's snowing in your part of the world today.
Yep.
And, you know, it's not a big stretch to imagine that in a month or two, you may have blizzards.
Right.
And the power may be threatened by that. Well, you know what? You're not at all interested in, wow, I need to buy a system so I can manage a power outage to my house.
Although I do have to do that.
I grew up in rural Western Ohio. We did too, but
yeah.
Yeah, you know, what you really want is knowing that your power company, your public utility company, is handling it. You know, they're skilled at it. And I agree with you. I think, you know, it's actually, we went out looking for something that we could use, found these guys, and said, you know, hey, there's IT functions out there who, they don't want to hire us to run their IT. They have an IT department, but they're missing pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
And part of it, you know, the traditional approach to this is, hey, let me just sell this to you. But we've said, no, wait a minute. We'll do that if you want it. Because, you know, hey, money. But at the end of the day, what may really be best for you is what we're calling co-managed IT.
Yeah, for sure. Because this is really the deal. Like, a security breach, you got to make sure the network and the data in the cloud is secured and flowing to avoid disruption. But then you need incident management and the network. So this is really like a 3-4 pronged approach when you really look at it.
Right.
And it is co-managed because these IT guys, a lot of them just don't know. They can't do everything.
They can't do everything, and they haven't been exposed. I mean, one of the big positives. Yeah, we deal with dozens and dozens of networks and infrastructures and companies and man, we've seen all kinds of stuff. The average in-house IT person probably has a much more limited exposure, but they have very deep knowledge of their environment. Right. So there's a lot of value to be had. They understand their company better. They understand their environment really well. It would take us, we'd get there eventually, but it would take us time to learn that stuff, whereas they already have it. But if we can work with them on an ongoing basis, and we work with an auto services retailer right now, where we've stepped in and they have a very, they have sort of a very persnickety point of sale system that is legacy and been cobbled together over time. They've got about 50 locations around the state, and they have a very definite window. They've only got between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. for any maintenance activities to get done. By 5 a.m., they've got to be done because they're opening. And you also can't do things like patching to the entire environment in one shot because, well, what if you pushed out a bad patch to all 50 locations? Right, at the same time. That's an absolute catastrophe. They brought us in to co-manage their patching process.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I look at all these possibilities, you can't both identify threats, minimize disruption, deal with the threats. These are 3-4 different, and I think this is the reality. Whether people get it today and contract with you in a co-IT environment, they will in some fashion or another. You know, they do de facto with partners and systems. So, and if we're moving into a service environment, I would encourage people to think like that, because the mega incidents that are happening, when I listen to executives, there's nothing worse than a major breach or something.
It's disastrous, and I've seen companies lose their business due to them. Right? I don't want to be alarmist, but I've seen companies that had to go out of business because they had some sort of significant incident, whether it was a security breach or even something as ridiculous as probably the worst and most egregious one I ever saw was a video editing company that had a SAN, a storage area network device, that the vendor had sold them without battery backup for the configuration. And they had about a week's power outage.
Oh my gosh.
When the SAN came back up, it had lost all configuration information. So the data was still on the drives, but you couldn't read it. It was a small business. The data recovery costs were so high.
Yeah.
You couldn't pay them.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
And these things are going to become more and more profound just with data in general. I mean, what is the State of the Union, Doug? 70% of workloads have not migrated to the cloud, only 30%.
Yeah,
what is the real deal?
It's about 60 to 70% of workloads still have not really migrated to the cloud. And whether they're on in-house virtualization or standalone servers, the majority of stuff is still not in a cloud environment, protected with all the things that you should get in a cloud environment. But even that's not, necessarily the case. People often make an assumption, and this is the case certainly with more end user oriented applications. Office 365 or Gmail are great examples of this, where hey, I deleted something out of my email that's on Office 365 6 months ago. Can you guys get it back for me? No. Microsoft maintains 30 days worth of backups.
Right.
And you always, right before you hear the anguished moan, you hear, but it's in the cloud.
Yeah, the data recovery would be insane. It is all zeros and ones. It's writing on hard disks, but
yeah,
you can't get it. You can't get it.
It's crazy.
Well, it's been a fascinating discussion, Doug. Got to wrap up because we're double our time than normal. Too, but we would like to follow up with you in the future and just tabs of the art of the possible versus the reality of execution.
No, I'd love to chat again, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of All Things Data. If you enjoyed this show and want more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and others, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating or a review. Until next time.